This is the next on the series on investing. Where should you put your money? I'm Lisa Linfield. In a previous video, we discussed that the path to financial freedom is that you first put your financial basics in place, that your income is more than your expenses, and that you have no short-term debt. You then put your financial protection in place, which means that you have the necessary tools to protect yourself against financial loss and to maintain the lifestyle you've worked so hard to achieve. Things like disability insurance, critical illness or cancer or stroke insurance, and wills if you have minor children or financial dependents. Then we were able to start building towards financial independence. And that is when you're able to generate the income to cover your daily expenses. Ideally, that would be enough assets that generate enough income to pay for your shelter, your house, your food, and your basic medical needs. And once you have that in place, you can then focus on financial freedom. The ability to have enough assets, enough revenue generating investments to fund your salary. 94% of people will never get there. Only 6% of the world are able to retire or be financially free in the same way that they lived before they retired. So it's hugely important that we start early on the path to financial freedom. The next thing is around what you need to know before you start investing. The first is that you need a detailed vision of your retirement. Are you retiring in an expensive place like New York, or are you wanting to retire right in a little village on the sea with very low expenses? You need to make sure that your basics are in place, that you have no debt, and that your income is more than expenses. You need a target. You need to understand how much do you need. And I tend to break that target down into the first step of how much do you need to cover your basic expenses, and then how much do you need for financial freedom. And then your timeline. The most important thing to understand is how much time you have, and knowing that the earlier you invest, the better. Before you start investing, you really need to understand risk. The amount your investments will grow depends on the risk you take. If you put your money under your mattress, you may think it is safe, but it doesn't earn any money. If you put your money in a bank, it is safer, but it earns less money than if you invest your money, for example, in shares. And in the middle, the most important thing when it comes to the risk of any form of asset is time. Because if you are investing for a short period, 3 years or less, then cash is the best, or cash type, income type funds is the best investment, because in a short term, shares go up and down and you could lose your money. In a short term, cash will ensure or guarantee that you will earn some interest on that money. However, in the very long term, cash is actually highly risky, because in many cases the interest is less than inflation, which means that that money will be able to buy you less the longer you leave it. Shares, for example, over a very long period of time, become less and less risky. The outcome is more stable than it is over a very short period of time. So time is hugely important. The other risk factors is tolerance. For some people, losing a very little amount of money is scary and stressful. So for them, it is important not to be in very risky assets. Need. If you've been saving since you were little, you probably are on track for your retirement growth and retirement needs, and you don't need to risk as much. However, if you haven't, then you do need to make sure that you have some higher risk elements to give you higher return or growth on your money. And then capacity. Just to remind you that if you have 100 million and you only need 10, you have the capacity to lose money in the short term because you already have your basic needs taken care of. So those 4 elements always work together in terms of understanding where you should invest. So, how should you invest or split your money? The first thing is cash flow management. You need to make sure that you are able to manage the fact that holidays are really expensive, that there are some months that aren't that expensive and some months that are more expensive. back to school, for example, always has more expenses than the middle of a school term. So it's very important that you have a cash flow management tool, which is a savings account linked to your bank account, that you can save for holidays regularly through the year, that when they come, you are not forced to go into debt. That you can save for things like clothes that you don't necessarily buy every single month and maybe buy seasonally, but save for during the year. School fees, anything that you pay quarterly or termly, that's a hugely important element in terms of whacking your cash flow. And at the end of the month, most of us spend to zero. So make sure that if you haven't spent all your money, that you put it in your cash flow account so that you can get through holiday seasons or tough expense times like school fees without having to go into debt. Next, emergency funds. Now, emergency funds are very important because what I hear so often is I was just getting things sorted out and then the car broke down, someone needed to go to hospital, something happened. So an emergency fund should have around 3 to 6 months of expenses in it and be in a money market or income fund. Most banks have money market funds. They earn more interest than a savings account, but you have to invest more money. So it's very important that you watch your interest rate as your money grows, because you might need to take one type of account with a little bit of money saved in your emergency fund, but as that grows and grows and grows, you can get an account that has much more interest paid to it. And that is so important for us to all make sure that we're earning as much money as we can on money that is sitting, saving for our emergency fund. It usually takes around 4 years to save for an emergency fund for most people. The next thing is a mortgage. Now, for every one extra payment that you make in a mortgage each year, you can reduce your mortgage term by 3 years in a low rate environment or by 6 years in a higher rate environment. Now, the most important thing is that you never access any overpayment because it destroys all of this saving. So your mortgage really should be for your mortgage and not for cash flow management. Long-term investments. Here you need both retirement investments and non-retirement investments. Now, the difference between them is simply that you could put the same fund or the same share or the same income fund in either a non-retirement or a retirement fund. And the only difference is tax. And what usually happens in retirement funds in America, they're called IRAs, they're called different things in every country. But essentially what it is that the government allows you to put money in there tax-free. But when you retire, you then pay tax on it. Whereas in a non-retirement fund, you can have the same investment, but the money is after tax. The government has taken a tax, and then you can invest it wherever you want. And what happens is that when you need the money, usually what you only pay capital gains tax. And capital gains tax is paid on how much the money grows. What's important about it is that in most countries, capital gains tax is less than income tax. So what I find is that people think they have a lot of money saved for retirement in retirement funds, but they haven't taken into account that they're going to pay income tax rates. And it's a lot of money that goes into tax when you're retired. So what you want to do is to have as much money in non-retirement funds when you are retired so that you pay less tax. Lastly, goal-based investments. Now, goal-based investments should always be taken care of once you've taken care of the basics. But regardless, it depends on the time. So if you are saving for a deposit on a house and it's less than 3 years away, then you need to save it in a non-risky asset, such as an income fund or a money market account. But if you are saving for longer term goals, then you can start adding in more risky assets. So people often ask me, if I have extra money or if I have money, what should I put it in first? And the answer hugely comes down to behavior. It depends on you. And the reason it depends on you is that if you are going to access it, if you're going to put your hands in the cookie jar and take out money saved, then you need to put it in things that you can't get your hands on. If, however, you are prudent and you don't touch your investments or your mortgage or anything, then there are recipes that you can follow. But for my private clients, for the clients that I work with one-on-one, the advice that I give them for every extra 100, where should they put it, is completely different. A young person with no dependents has a completely different order than a person who's got a lot of dependents and no money saved. So it all comes down to whether you are going to access that money or not. In theory, you should do it in this order, which is that you make sure that 10% of your monthly expenses is saved until you hit that 3 to 6 months mark. Then get that one extra mortgage payment. You can split it over 12 months to make sure that you save it evenly through the year. And then you do your long-term investments. And I have got an example, which is that if you have 2,000 of monthly expenses and you have 300 to save, then the first 10% of 2,000 is 200 that you need to save for your emergency fund. Then if your mortgage payment is 600, then 1 month of that is 50. And then your next 50 can go into your long-term savings. Now, as I said, if you're going to put your hand back into the mortgage to access the extra money if you need it, then rather don't put it into the mortgage and put it into the long-term savings. If, for example, in your long-term investments, you might access those, then rather put it in retirement funds, which have greater penalty clauses and won't let you touch them, or get your employer to take more money out into the retirement fund before you even have access to it. So the biggest question you've got to ask yourself is, am I going to access this? If you're not, then this is the theory of it, but it depends entirely on your personal spending habits. I'm Lisa Linfield. Take care and have a great week.